Good day. Dressing, poultry, carcass evisceration, and meat cuts. Presented by Venamen F. Miasco, BSABE2-2. The topic outline of this presentation. First is the introduction to slaughtering. Second, management of animals prior to slaughtering. Third is different cuts of broiler, pork, and beef. And the fourth is definition of terms. Introduction. What is slaughtering? Slaughtering is mostly known in the field of agriculture. As it means, slaughter is the process for killing of animals intended for human consumption. The term slaughter is also used to depict killing of animals by bleeding. Most farm animals are killed by bleeding. First and foremost, it's important to understand that chickens or the broilers go through a few different phases of development on their journey to adulthood. And most importantly, all chickens mature at different rates depending on a variety of factors, including the breed, feeding schedules, and types of feed. So here's now the management of animals prior to slaughtering. And we are focusing on broilers. Number one is the feeding withdrawal. It is the removal of feed to empty gastrointestinal tract contents. So it reduces the risk of fecal contamination at the processing plant. So the feed should be removed from the flock 8 to 12 hours before the expected time of processing. The second is catching. To minimize light intensity and avoid sudden increases in light intensity. Can control and adjust ventilation carefully to avoid heat stress of the broilers. To catch birds with care, avoiding injury. So there is a clear guidelines in the place, and the catching process should be monitored and reviewed regularly. So it is essential to have an appropriate personnel training. The third is the transport. The transportation should be done using suitable vehicles, which can provide adequate protection from the weather and appropriate ventilation and are within the local current guidelines or legislation. So during the transport, the use of ventilation, extra heating, and cooling when necessary. So minimize stops, transport distances, and transport time. And also to adhere to local guidelines. Number 4 is the holding. Upon arrival of the processing plant, the birds or the broilers need to be held in a cool, weatherproof area. So the humidity, the temperature, and the bird comfort should be routinely monitored, and holding time prior to slaughter minimized. Next is the different cuts of broiler, pork, and beef. So here's what we need to know. The cuts of broiler, as a whole chicken, uh, as a whole chicken, we can see that the drumstick, the leg, the breast, the wing, the thigh. So in the cuts of pork, we can see here in the screen the shoulder, the loin, the belly, the leg, and the other small cuts of pork meat. So the next is the cuts of beef. In the screen, the photo is the head, the chuck, the rib, the short loin, the sirloin, the round, the shank, the flank, short plate, the shank in the front, and the brisket. The brisket. So we can see here the different cuts of the beef. So here are the definition of terms. Number one is the meat. So what is meat? Meat as the edible parts of an animal that is used for human consumption. It includes the flesh, the fat, the muscles, and the offal of an animal. So the offal is the parts of the animal such as the liver, the kidney, the tongue, that are often consumed or used as part of a recipe. The second is the slaughtering. Slaughtering means process of killing of animals intended for human consumption. So used to depict killing of animals by bleeding. Third is the fasting. It is one of the parameters that influence the stress coping ability of the animals during transport and lairage. So, stop feeding animals up to 24 hours before being sent to slaughter, so there are no traces of food in their digestive system that impede the processing of the meat. So, it's also a feed withdrawal. Number four is butchering. Butchering is cutting and slicing of meat. So it is for intended for business, for selling and income generation purposes. So the person who cuts and slices the meat for selling and division of parts of a slaughtered livestock animal is called the butcher. Number five or fifth is scalding. Scalding is accomplished by submerging the entire carcass in hot 60 to 63 degrees Celsius water for several minutes. So, itong step na to is completed when the hair follicles are loosened such that hair locks from the skin. Next is bleeding. Involves severing the carotid arteries and the jugular veins, or the vessels from which they arise. So it has been shown that for all red meat species, whatever type of electrical stunning is used, the most effective method of bleeding is the chest stick, which severs all the major blood. Next is the plucking. What is plucking? It is the removal of feathers through the use of greater force. So when the bird is not molting, their feathers are firmly attached to the follicles, and it is necessary to use force to remove them. The last is the singeing. It ensures removal of remaining hair follicles that can be a source of contamination. So the temperature of a singeing chamber can be about 1,200 degrees Celsius, and the surface of the carcass can rise to over 100 degrees Celsius after only 10 to 15 seconds exposure. So here are the references of this presentation. Thank you for listening.